Hello, welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma, and sorry, I forgot to ask just to confirm, but I'm going to give your name a try. It's Mike Hearn.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so you're here to talk about it's hydraulic.
It's called Conveyor. Yeah, Hydraulic Conveyor.
Yeah, conveyor.
Yes.
I had to type in Hydraulic Conveyor Desktop in order to find it because the first search result was not close.
Right. SEO is something we're still working on because it's a new product, but the idea is that it's sort of, it conveys your application to the user, right? But, yeah. Maybe we should have gone for a name that can't be pronounced and has missing vowels and things, so we get a better SEO.
Why don't you go ahead and kind of give a quick introduction about what it actually is?
Yeah, so Conveyor is a tool to make distributing desktop apps much easier. We say the goal is to have distributing a desktop app be as easy as distributing a web app, and for the user experience to be really good as well. It's a new product. It's been out for less than a year, and we only added support for Flutter in February, so you probably haven't heard of us before. But the developer experience we're going for is effectively it's like compiling a website from Markdown to static HTML. So you have some input files and you run it through the tool, and then you upload the results to a web server, and you're done. So very simple. And actually, Conveyor can actually upload files for you too in some cases. So that's not easy to do for desktop apps, and as a consequence, we've been working on that for a while, but it does work, and it supports not only Flutter apps, but any application that has special support for Flutter and Electron and JVM, but you can use it for, if you want to write an app in Rust or something as well, you can do that too. Yeah, it takes care of a lot of the annoying aspects of desktop app distribution for you. It can code sign, it can generate packages for Windows and Mac, both Intel and ARM, and also for Linux, generates debs and app repositories. It integrates auto update for you, so you don't have to think about that. Your apps just automatically will update online. And it can do all of that for any OS, from any OS. So you can actually, in some cases, you can distribute apps straight from your laptop with no need to master any platform-specific tooling. And finally, it has a simple config syntax, so it abstracts the operating system for you, but you can still do OS-specific things if you want to. And that's basically the value proposition. We just make it really easy to distribute a desktop app, and when it's really easy, maybe you find it makes more sense to bring your mobile app to the big screen by making a Flutter Desktop app instead of trying to do a web port or even rewrite the app from scratch as a web app, for example. Yeah, that's the gist, and we're always adding more features to make this goal and this vision come true.
Yeah, well, I get so many questions. I mean, at a high level, it makes sense, and I've had to deal with cross-platform apps. So we were talking before we started recording, right? We all have Macs over here, but we're delivering a Windows app to our client. It's been nice that basically things, for the most part, were cross-platform in terms of the features of the app. The only thing that's been a bother is that we're using WinSparkle, and for some weird reason, WinSparkle is not working as well as it does on Mac for the plugin that we're using.
Yep.
And like really not bad, right? Like really not good, I think. But the other thing too is code signing. So like the question is like, what installer should I use? First of all, that was the first question. And I had familiarity with Inno Setup.
Yep.
Is it InnoDB Setup or something? I forget what it's called. It's called Inno Setup, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch. Yep.
And that one works fine because I've done it before. But then I thought, okay, these guys are finance. I need to be a little bit more professional. And I took a look at MSIX, which I think Flutter's been pushing a lot.
Yep.
And that one was a little bit of a pain because I don't feel like paying to get verified, which I'm pretty sure is what you need to have if you want to get your stuff kind of signed by Microsoft. I didn't look into it, so maybe I'm just talking, right? But
well, so let's start with the formats and the updaters, right? So Conveyor generates MSIX files on Windows. For Windows. It can generate them on Mac OS and Linux as well, of course. And then the Windows will take care, that's like the Windows native packaging format. So Windows will take care of keeping the app up to date in the background. So it gives you Chrome style updates where, even if the user isn't running the program, it will be the polls every 8 hours or so in the background, and Windows will silently upgrade your app for you. Conveyor goes further, and it also gives you what we call aggressive updates, because every time the app starts, it's checking for an update, and then if there is one, it'll apply that update automatically and then start the app. So you can get web-like updates in this way. And you don't have to learn MSIX or anything like Microsoft tooling, because Conveyor generates all that stuff for you. And then on Mac OS, it uses Sparkle. And for Linux users, it generates a tarball, and it generates a dep with an apt repository as well for people who use Debian and Ubuntu. And we might add RPM and DNF repositories in future too. Code signing is definitely a huge pain for desktop applications. And so, what we've done, we spend a lot of time on making that less painful. In particular, you can code sign for Windows and Mac from any OS, including Linux, or you can code sign Mac from Windows, or you can code sign Windows from Mac, and everything is supported in every combination. So you can also self-sign, which will generate security warnings and things on Mac OS. But you can also do that on Windows, and we're actually improving the user experience of self-signed applications in the next release. But to eliminate all security issues, and especially if you're distributing to finance and so on, then yeah, it's worth buying a signing certificate. Simply because that is expected these days. It's a part of the security systems and how they ensure that you're not distributing malware. You don't have to have Windows to do that. You can buy these certificates without having it. You can buy them from a Mac, but you do have to pay. Now, one of the things we've been thinking about and researching a little bit is actually in the longer run, although it's not a feature that is offered by any existing system today. Could we, for example, sign on the behalf of other users? So, Conveyor today is a tool. It's not a service. I should have said that. Actually, it's a command line tool you download and run locally, and it's an incremental build system. So you can just run it, over and over and experiment to get the effects you want and test locally and so on. And it's free to download, and it's free for open source projects. For commercial projects, you pay for it when you point it at a non-local host update URL, basically. But if we were to do a service version one day, then we've looked at doing something like sandboxing, so we could then sign the app, and because we're packaging it, right, we know that it's running inside a sandbox, and then we know it can't be malware, and it's safe to sign on behalf of other people. The final thing you can do, actually, to avoid the signing requirement on Windows is publish through the Microsoft Store, which Microsoft will actually, you still have to pay, you have to join their developer program, but Microsoft will sign for you if you do that. And so that's another way to go.
So you're saying it's a tool, though. So does that mean, how do I say? I'm still kind of confused about how it works, right? So I download this thing. Is it actually running on your servers and kind of pushing all my stuff over to it?
Nope, it runs everything local. So yeah, you were asking how it works, right?
Yeah, that's the part I'm so confused, because it's how come you can do cross compile but not Flutter out of the box, or not some of these other ones out of the box?
Right. So the reason, right? So there is no magic. There's just a lot of work. So Conveyor itself implements support for writing all of the package formats for each platform. It implements Apple's code signing infrastructure and system, so it knows how to generate all those data formats itself. Likewise for MSIX, it knows how to generate that and sign those files and do it all itself. So that was a pain. It was a pain to implement, but the upshot is that it's, from the user perspective, it's super simple. You just type make site and it runs. And a minute or two later, you have a directory with all the files you need to upload to your web server. And it even generates a little download HTML page for you, which gives a big green button that users can click, and it looks at the browser to see what OS and CPU you have, and will give the user the right download. So there is no there are no servers behind the scenes getting your stuff. You can use it for sensitive internal apps if you want. There's no need to upload or download things. It is just literally, it's a bit old school. I've been developing a long time, and we just implemented it in some ways the most obvious, but also maybe it's not obvious way, which is we just implement all the stuff. Right? These are stable file formats.
I'm still confused about what's the magic that you guys are able to do it. I'm still not quite following. That's the part I'm still lost on.
Okay, so there's two. Okay, so there's two parts, right? So For Flutter, we don't cross-compile. If you want to compile your Flutter app to Windows binary, for example, then at the moment at least you need to do that with Windows CI. Once you've got the output files from that process, we have a demo of doing it with GitHub Actions, for example. So we've got a GitHub action that we've launched and a workflow you can just copy into your repository, and then you get the binaries you need. And it can even run Conveyor on a Linux worker, but you don't have to do that. You can run it locally too. And then what you do is you give the files for each platform to Conveyor. You put them in a location, and your config points the tool towards those files. You run the tool, and out pops all the files you need. And the reason it can do that is, like I said, it's at that point it's doing all the work itself. It doesn't depend on any of Microsoft's tools, doesn't depend on any of Apple's tools. It can also sign and notarize. It will upload the app to Apple for notarization, wait for that to complete, download the notarized app and tick it, and then you're ready to go. So at that point, you don't need any special tooling or any special setup. And now with Flutter, because of the way Flutter Desktop works, you do need to compile on each platform. But for example, for other runtimes like the JVM or Electron, where the runtime comes pre-packaged for you or pre-compiled for you, you can release everything from your laptop. You don't need any CI system or any cross-compiling at all.
Okay, so it actually cannot cross-compile then, if I understand correctly.
Well, it takes so it's a packaging tool, right? So it takes the output of whatever you need to ship to the user, and then it takes it from there. So if you write an app, if you write like an Electron or Java app, then you're shipping jars or JavaScript files and HTML. So it takes those. With Flutter, it takes the output of the build system. Now, we could go further and do cross-compiling. We could do cross-compiling as well. That feature could be added if people want it, but at some point you're probably going to be testing it on those platforms anyway, right? So you're going to have a VM or something around anyway for that, I would imagine.
Okay, so all right, so in my head, because I watched the video and I had in my head that it was actually building and then putting the setup together. So actually, it's not.
For Flutter apps, you're expected to provide you invoke the build system yourself.
Okay, now I got it. Okay, because when I watched it, I don't know, it's like, to me, when I watched it, let's see, you have an iTerm video over here.
Yeah, so those videos, I think one of the video you saw was probably packaging either a JVM or Electron app. And in those cases, you don't need to cross-compile anything because of the nature of the runtimes.
Yeah, generate Electron, and it does everything. Conveyor makes site, and it's building all the stuff. Gotcha. Now I understand. Okay, much more clear.
Right. Yeah. When you run make site, what it's doing is it downloads Electron for each platform and then bundles it together with your files and generates the self-updating packages. So.
Okay. So. Okay, that makes a lot more sense, because I'm like, how the heck do these guys figure out how to build the system? So you're not building it; it's only for packaging.
Yes.
And distribution. Okay, now it's much more clear, because I thought you guys had some magic sauce about how to build it.
Right.
And I'm thinking that's why I was skeptical, because I was like, how does this thing work? Are you shipping off to a build server on your side, and that's why you're asking?
Well, I mean, we could add something like that, but there are already CI companies out there that do this kind of thing. And we could also do some cross-compiling for some combinations, like you can compile Windows apps on Mac OS or Linux, right? You can do that. So if you are on a Mac, then compiling for Linux and Windows is possible. But then you would run into doing the opposite direction is harder.
All right. So if I wanted to say make site on my Mac machine, would I have to go to I could do the building on Windows, so someone transfer over to my Mac, do it on Linux, transfer back over to my Mac, put them in certain places. I'm guessing in the config file, I can point to where they are, run my make site, and it's going to go to those directories and then do the signing and put them up. Okay, now I got you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And actually, Conveyor can download the inputs from other locations. So if you've got the URL of your Windows build output or your Linux build output, then it will download it for you. And then it can upload the results for you. So at that point, you just say go, and it does a release. And then your app, and then your users will start updating automatically.
Okay. Now I'm much more clear about what's going on. Okay. It's still cool nonetheless, because how does the Windows side work? So obviously using MSIX, you're not using WinSparkle, I'm guessing. You're using something else.
Well, so MSIX is quite interesting because it's effectively a bit like a Linux package, but Microsoft's take on that concept. So if you package your app this way, it's declarative, and an MSIX is effectively a special kind of zip that has some XML inside, and it's got a bunch of other things. So you can't actually make these with normal zip code, but you can unzip them with a normal zip tool to have a look at what's inside. And Windows interprets all this and understands it, and has the update engine built in. All Windows 10 and 11 machines have support for this. So once the app is installed, then it will be kept up to date automatically. Now, we don't use MSIX directly. We provide a little installer exe that the user interacts with, and that's partly for familiarity and partly to work around bugs in old versions of Windows. So that takes care of some details for you, but it's got some very nice features. And in particular, it's really great for apps written using frameworks like Flutter and Electron and Java and so on, because one of the neat tricks that Microsoft has implemented is it only downloads the files and even the parts of files you don't already have. So if you've already got a Flutter app installed through the Microsoft Store, or indeed that was built with Conveyor or was shipped in MSIX format, then Windows knows that, and it will copy the relevant files from the other applications, or even it will copy like half of the file from another application. So you'll end up only downloading the part of the app that's really unique to you, and that means you can have really, really fast install and start. You can get, I mean, we've seen, admittedly, I've got a good internet connection here, but we've seen cases where it installs and opens a new app from scratch about as fast as a web page can load, which is pretty fast. Once you click the exe, so a second or two. If you're on a slow web server, then this can actually be as fast as that, which is pretty radical and pretty new for desktop applications.
I mean, the MSIX kind of format style thing. Are you talking about the way you update?
Well, it's both. So
Yeah.
the MSIX, the way it works is every package has what they call a block map. So every part of every file is hashed, and there's an index of all those hashes. And then Windows has a database behind the scenes of all the files it's installed that way, with all their hashes, and then it lines them up. So the moment it sees, oh yeah, I've already got like these blocks, it assembles them on disk while simultaneously downloading the ones it's missing, and then it's just like done, and the app launches.
Yeah, I noticed that when we were testing out the upgrades, it was like so fast, so efficient.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
the one thing that freaked me out, I was like, this worked too well first time around.
Well, that's good. That's what we like to hear. That's a lot of work to get to that point.
Yeah, I understand that they put a lot of effort into it, and like now I know why they recommend it, but it was like, this worked too well, too good. There's something wrong. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'll tell you the catch with MSIX, which is, like I said, some old versions of Windows, and in some cases there are bugs which you need to just find and work around. Now, Conveyor does that for you. It's because that even when they fix bugs, right, not everyone updates Windows at the same time. So Conveyor makes it easy to get the benefits of MSIX while missing the sharp edges, and that's a part of what it's doing for you. So you can, if you want, you can make these packages yourself. So you're not locked in. I should have mentioned this already. Conveyor does not. If you start using it and want to stop, right, you're not locked into a cloud service or anything like that. You can just go and start making those package formats in the old-fashioned way, and so you can transition away from it. But yeah, it's taking care of a lot of weird details, and in particular things that you might not, it works around issues you might not even be able to reproduce, because we've been out in the market now for a while, so we've seen some of these, and that's the thing. But when it works. And these days it does work very well, because, like I said, we've done a lot of testing and fixing and things. It's sort of, it's when especially if you're close to the server, it can be really magical. You like click it, and it's almost like loading Gmail, right? There's like a progress bar that goes left to right in a second or two, and the app can start.
Now, you talked about the code signing. I mean, obviously, if you get your stuff signed by Microsoft or whoever, I think they're the ones who's probably running the root certificate, right? Maybe a couple other people, but self-signing, you said you also support that. That means you must have a way to load in the self-signed certificate.
Yes, yeah. So when you self-signing is kind of useful for things like open source tools or internal tools, or any time when either you don't care that much about security warnings being shown to the users, or if you can distribute your signing certificates to end users. So, for example, inside a company, right, you can go to your IT department if you have managed computers and say, hey, can you push out this certificate and make it trusted? And Conveyor makes all of that very easy. And if you self-sign, then the download HTML page it generates will change, and it becomes a bit less simple. It will give the user instructions for how to like open the app on Mac OS, and on Windows, it will install the certificate for you, so that you are then considered a trusted certificate authority in effect for the purposes of your own app.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I actually spent about, I don't know, between 1.5 to 2 days figuring out how to install the certificate for my self-sign app.
Yeah.
But once I figured it out, I was like, okay, this is getting locked up because this process is not easy to find. And like everybody's talking about, oh yeah, you could just got to install a certificate. And it's like, okay, but I double click certificate and I click it to like auto install or do something.
Yeah, it's easy to put it in the wrong place. And
not even that, like it doesn't, the sad part is you wish it would put it in the right place for you automatically, but it doesn't. You have to say, put it into trusted people. So anybody's listening, you want to self-sign it, put it into trusted people.
Yes.
It took me many times to figure it out.
This is exactly, I mean, so this kind of frustration is exactly why we created Conveyor, right? Because there are way too many weird details and sharp edges in this whole process normally. And this is one of the things that pushes people towards doing web apps, even if sometimes it's not entirely appropriate. And the background of why Conveyor was created is in the last 10 years, I've done a lot of projects that were various kind of research projects, or, what the finance guys would call innovation projects, where we've been doing things with, peer-to-peer networks and cryptography and other sort of interesting security features and hardware. And doing this in the context of the browser is very, very painful. And what I would often find, and I bash my head against this problem again and again, is that, we'd sit down and I'd make a little prototype or something, and people would say, but it needs to be in the browser. We don't know how to do a desktop app. Well, people would say, how do we do this or that? And I'd say, well, the best way would be probably to do a desktop app. And then, because it's so painful and difficult to create these and distribute it, and people don't know how, they would end up trying to like cram what they were doing into the constraints of the browser, even if along the way they ended up almost undermining their own vision, right? They would end up changing what they were doing to fit the constraints of the browser in a way that made sometimes a project kind of pointless by the end, or certainly a long way from what it was meant to be. So after enough repeats of this problem, I said, you know what, no, it's time. I'm gonna quit my job and make a company, and we're just gonna fix this. So it's easy, and then we'll take away that whole set of excuses, and people can use the right tool for the job. And so, yes, if you've self-signed on with Conveyor, then the little installer exe on Windows will put the certificate in the right place. You just don't need to know about it, and it will take care of that. And at that point, your app will self-update, and all these things are taken care of for you.
Yeah, I thank you, because it sounds like you already understand my frustration is that there's a lot of caveats that people say, yeah, you can do it. But it's like, okay, but how?
Yes, exactly.
And they don't reply or whatever. Or usually I'm finding old threads, right? It's been years, and it's like, well, I don't know how to contact the guy, and he's not trying to reply.
There's a lot of old information. So
I think I still have a Stack Overflow issue up that's not been replied. That I need to reply to.
Everyone who's gone through this has that experience, right? Which is why, when I was doing this, I thought, okay, do I take a time out and do this and just open source it or whatever? And I thought, no, actually, the reason that Conveyor is a commercial product is it comes with support, because very often people need help. They've not done this kind of thing before. And so when you buy it, right, you get support, and if you have problems, you can email us, or we've got a Discord chat room, and you can chat to us. And and that's very helpful. And what we find is that that's very appreciated by our users, right, and our customers, because they want to launch their app, and they just want to like blast through problems and not be digging through Stack Overflow if they hit a problem. And so Conveyor takes care of most of it. And then if they have an issue with some weird library they're using or whatever, then they can get help from us, and we help them out a bit.
Well, I like the fact that you guys are letting open source packages use it, because I'm kind of curious. Is there actually any open source packages? I'm guessing there must be some, but
sure.
Anything that we might know?
I don't think it would be anything you would know. They're not big names. They're mostly cases where, people wrote there's some open source Java programs. There's a couple of Electron ones, and they're mostly cases where people were just like, I just want to write a little utility and get it up there so it's easy for people to download, and I don't want to waste a lot of time on it because it's not a big effort. Right? But what we have done actually is when we were adding Electron support, we repackaged GitHub Desktop. And so we've got a repository and a blog post where we take you through like how do you convert an app to use Conveyor if it's big and complicated and has lots of features and has been around a long time. And GitHub Desktop, it was a good fit for that. And the nice thing about that is you can delete a lot of code at the end. Like the blog post says, okay, you start by, here's a config for it, and this is how it works. And at the end, you can delete something like 10,000 lines of code. I can't remember; it was huge, but because Conveyor is so much simpler.
Yeah, and then I also like the fact that you guys you can try everything out locally before you throw down the money. That's pretty cool too.
Yeah, exactly. It's designed so you can easily mess about and see if it works with your app and try things out, right? And then once you know that you're ready to go, that's the moment at which you pay if you're distributing a commercial app. So the other nice thing is you can overlap it. Like, so you can, if you think once you've decided this is going to work and we're going to do this, you can get someone else to go pay for it, right? And while the expenses process is rolling or whatever it is inside your company, you can keep working, and then go for it. And then actually when you buy it, you get a pack of 3 apps, so you can actually use Conveyor for more than one app.
Yeah, I saw that 3 apps. Why 3? Why not do one by one or something like that?
Well, that's a good question, and we might experiment a bit with the pricing to see what works better for people. But the idea was originally because we said, well, we want to make this super easy. If we make it easier, people will do it more. So the idea is once you've discovered how easy it is now, then the next step is you say, maybe I make another desktop app actually, and we wanted to get people into this mindset of saying now it's easy, we can do it a lot more. The other one is that if you want like a separate beta track, for example, which updates on a different schedule and has different code and so on, then that's considered to be a different app because it's a different download and update site, basically. So some users, they use their additional like free apps to do daily dev builds for internal people and beta builds for early adopters and things, and then each one of those is considered a separate app.
That's good. How's the feedback been? I mean, have you guys? I'm guessing the first time you let it out into the wild, you got a lot of interesting bugs. People doing weird things, right?
Yes. Well, like I said, so a lot of the Conveyor value proposition is actually that we hit these weird bugs and we work around them for you because one of the the browsers have many limitations, right? But one of the advantages of something like Chrome is that it's very consistent across platforms, and we're sort of bringing that level of consistency to the desktop distribution experience too. So when we released it, it's interesting. We got a lot of great feedback. Our customers and our users tend to come to us a bit shell shocked. Like what usually happens is they start with like trying to use the free tools and do everything themselves because they sort of read the tutorial of their framework or whatever, and it says, oh, here's the distribution section which comes last. Use this tool, use the Apple tools, figure something out yourself for Linux. And then they think, oh, well, how hard can it be? Because they haven't done it before. So go down this path of trying to do it themselves. And then eventually they just think this is insane. And then they somehow find out about us. And that's something that we're working on improving because that's, how do you find out about this, right? It's not so easy. So then they come and say, this is the final straw. I need this to work. They use it, it works. And then they're super, super happy. And even what we found is that we haven't lost a single user or customer yet, actually. Every single person who starts using Conveyor sticks with it, which is really nice. Even if they do encounter bugs or we have to improve the product or fix things in a certain way, right? It's still better than the alternatives. And so, yeah, we've got some testimonials on the website where people have expressed this sort of, this sort of sentiment, right? Like, finally, so glad you guys exist now because finally we can get this sorted.
Yeah, there is just a lot of caveats you have to be careful about. That's what I ran into. So, and like I said, seeing your reaction, it's like, okay, obviously you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep, exactly. I think it's a lot of like the equivalent in the web world is the cloud providers where you say, oh, I want to make a web app, and then it starts out very easy, and you're going fast. You make some HTML or JavaScript or whatever, or you start with Flutter and you do a UI, and then you want a backend, and suddenly there's this universal complexity that hits you with respect to like databases and backups and replication and scaling and so on. And so the cloud guys come in and say, we'll take care of that for you. And then people say, thank you very much. That simplifies it a lot. And there hasn't been an equivalent of that up until now for the distribution on the desktop side. And like I said, Conveyor is not a cloud service. It runs locally. It's a tool, and that has all kinds of advantages in terms of latency and privacy and so on, which is why it works that way. But the gist of it is the same, right? You use this product to take away all of that complexity and let other people get the battle scars for you.
To me, I would actually relate it to like CSS tags. Like sometimes they're supported in some browsers, sometimes not.
Yep.
And sometimes you have to add in this weird stuff to make it all work. To me, front end is each browser's got some pain to it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure. If you stick to like one browser, then you're fine. But in the real world, you target many, and then the inconsistency starts to add up. Yeah.
Still mostly Chrome. Luckily, Microsoft did the nice thing, and they took Chromium underneath the hood, which was kind of nice. But no, but yeah, you still have Safari and Firefox to deal with, and Brave.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think over time, the vision of the product is to just chip away at more and more of those things, and try and get it to that point where we're just getting rid of ever more complexity. Hence why I mentioned earlier, what can we do about code signing? Well, it's a security feature, so you can also solve that in the same way the web does with sandboxing. That's a kind of a research project. I don't know if that will launch. It's something we have to evaluate and look at demand and things.
Yeah, for the JVM one, that means that like IntelliJ or these other kinds of Java-based systems, you can just package them up pretty easily, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for them, you don't have to do any compilation, right? You just go straight from your laptop. And actually, we've been talking to the JetBrains guys because what they have is a lot of students who start learning programming with their IDEs, and then they pick something. I haven't heard so much about Flutter, but they start with like Java because it's been taught in universities. Maybe in future that'll be Flutter instead. And they make great progress, and they make something that looks good and it's easier for them than the web stack because it's one language and it's consistent and so on. But then they want to show people what they've made. They want to send it to their friends and family, and they immediately hit this like brick wall of distribution and pain. And then they say, "Oh, okay, well, everyone's telling me I should throw everything away that I've learned and start again with HTML." And then you've got multiple languages to learn, right? Because it's markup and JavaScript and CSS, and then on the back end, maybe a different language again. So it becomes very complex. And so what they would like, we've talked about working together such that if you're just working on something, you just push a button, it uploads to GitHub, so your app is open source, you then qualify for a free license, and then Conveyor packages it and releases to GitHub releases, which it can do, and out pops a HTML page that you can just direct your users to on GitHub pages, for example. They press download and off it goes. We've been working on that for a while, getting there incrementally, release by release. We've been chipping away at that, getting a little closer. For example, the last release will now draw icons for you, because one of the many little caveats and catches that crops up when you do a desktop app, right, versus a web app is now you have to draw a nice icon. And you don't think about it, but every platform has its own formats and its own visual styles, and maybe you're not an artist. So Conveyor will actually generate a reasonable default icon for you now, and it can render SVGs, and you don't have to think about the platform-specific formats. And again, it can do that because it does everything itself. It implements the icon formats and things itself. So with all that, now we're much closer to saying, here's a standard project that you haven't done anything to, and press go, and you have an updating and downloading experience that's really nice.
Okay, yeah. I'm just trying to think about, it seems like everything works out of the box, and I'm trying to think, are you just stopping at this piece, or do you plan to expand into doing a little bit more, right? Because you're already doing, it wouldn't be out of the question to actually offer cloud CI build for customers, right? Is it something that you'd be looking at, because that'd be a full solution, right?
Yes, it's something we think about. Actually, I was talking to the CodeMagic guys just a few weeks ago about a potential partnership. At the moment, it's easy enough to, at least for open source apps, it's easy enough to use GitHub Actions to do this. Most companies will have a CI service already in place, we think. But especially for the smaller or more casual apps where you don't want to set that up, we could offer something like that relatively easily. we have a lot of plans. The question is really what we can find demand for. At the moment, we've got some more features in preparation for the next release, but our primary effort at the moment has to be things like fixing SEO. And as you mentioned, right, we don't even show up if you search for the product name at the moment because you get shown actual conveyor belts. And there's a bunch of other things we can do to improve awareness in the community, like podcasts, for example. So in terms of future features, we're mostly at the moment, we're trying to ensure that we support all the frameworks that we've got awareness in all the communities. And in this way we can drive adoption and make sure that, we grow nicely as a company.
No. I was just looking at all the stuff you have. You have quite a few. You have a nice Flutter demo over here. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah. We've got tutorials and things for, you create a standard Flutter app and then you put some config file in place, and you can also set up actions and so on for CI if you want. And then at the end, you get like the download site with everything you need. One of the things that we actually have. So when Hydraulic was created, we actually have a whole plan, a whole roadmap that goes well beyond just desktop app packaging, and it actually takes us into the realm of almost like a new web-like platform, which tries to resolve some of the problems of the web. And we've got a design document for this, which I actually shared with the tech lead of Flutter just a couple of days ago, just to see what he thought. And the idea is, rather than try and make web browsers handle Flutter apps better, which is difficult for various political reasons mostly, you actually say, well, how do we just go from the current desktop experience and iteratively make it better and better and better until you've got something that's almost a bit like a web browser or a bit like the web, but which is much more open to alternative app frameworks, and whilst also solving things like crawling and indexing and linking and sandboxing and all these things. I don't think, at the moment we're not working on it because there's no business model that we can find for that right now. Most platforms like Flutter and so on and the web depend on patronage, basically, right? They're sort of funded by rich companies that just want them to exist. And so any alternative would also need to either find a business model or find a patron. But it's a sort of interest, it sort of guides our thinking a little bit about where we take the product in the future. And so, for example, when I mentioned sandboxing, you can start reusing, for example, the Chrome sandboxing code to simplify distribution even further if you can get rid of the code signing requirements, and then you can start to have some support for transiency, for example, apps that uninstall themselves if you don't use them, so the user doesn't have to clean up apps, and you can tell them that, so they're more willing to install them in the first place and things like that.
All right, we heard a lot of the good talk, right? Now, let's hear some of the negativity, right? Sorry, I know there can't be a silver bullet for everything, right? Like, what kinds of things where this maybe is not a good fit? I mean, there must be something, right? Maybe I'm too negative in my comment, but I'm saying like I want to hear the other side too, because
well, obviously, okay. So obviously, the first.
What's the catch?
We're all engineers, right? There's always trade-offs. Everything is trade-offs. So, well, so the most obvious catch, firstly, is this is it's not an open source product. It's a commercial product. So if that's a problem, then that's just a problem, and you're not going to get a solution for that. So that's a big one. And we do actually offer a source license. We haven't had any takers yet, but if you wanted the source very badly for some reason, you could buy it from us. But that's the main caveat. The second one is we only currently generate Debian packages and app repositories. We don't do there's this long tail of Linux distributions, right? The obvious one to add next would be Red Hat, or possibly something like Flatpak on Linux. So our Linux format support is okay. A lot of users are on Ubuntu and so on, and it works great for them, but it's not as complete. The main reason we haven't done Flatpak is that, like always with Linux, this ecosystem is split, right? Ubuntu does not use it, and also it's mandatory sandboxing, which can break applications if they don't support all of the new APIs that are being added for that. So that's a catch. Of course, nothing stops you making a Flatpak separately, right? Just because you use Conveyor doesn't mean, again, you're not locked into it. So you could also do the extra work yourself, but the product doesn't do that for you. And then the other negative parts, I guess that's it. There isn't a whole lot. It's a pretty straightforward kind of tool, right? It's about just making developers' lives easier. There's not a whole lot of catches. But yeah, I guess the main one would be that it doesn't build your app for you. So as you mentioned, it's not a complete solution for Flutter or C++ apps at the moment without cross-compiling or CI. For Flutter, I suspect in many cases, you don't actually need to compile the app at all. That's something that we might look at if there's demand. If demand picks up from the Flutter community, of course, we can spend more time on solving problems for the Flutter community. And for example, the native code components of each app are pretty boilerplate, right? Like the tooling creates them, but you don't need to edit the C++ side on Windows unless you want to achieve some special effect. So one thing we could look at doing is recognizing that you haven't altered that, and you're only changing the Dart code. And then combine it with a precompiled version, for example. That's the kind of thing I think we would look at rather than integrating with a CI tool.
In any case, yeah, I mean, it would be great if you had like a one-stop solution, because that's the one thing that's bugging me. I mean, signing, yeah, that's definitely another issue, but once you have it patted down, like I just been writing per curious notes, like keeping notes, keeping backups, everything, kind of writing stuff down, readmes and wikis, etc. It helps a lot.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of work on making code signing easier so far. So, for example, Conveyor can generate all of the keys that you need for every platform from a single root key. I don't know if you ever encountered Bitcoin wallets or used wallet software from the cryptocurrency community, but they have this trick where you can represent a private key as words. And instead of representing it as a huge hex number or something like that, it's translated into a series of English words, which you can then much more easily write down with a pen and paper, right? Because that's what you're used to dealing with. And so Conveyor uses the same system. And when you generate it, it can actually, if you've already got signing keys, that's fine. You just supply them. But if you're new to desktop development, you only have to back up this one root key, which, as I said, you can actually write down with a pen and paper. And then it will generate all the rest of the things for you, and then it can generate the CSR files that you need to upload to the certificate authorities. That you don't need any particular OS for. So you can actually acquire all the certificates you need just using a web browser and a credit card with that. And at that point, you can take the files that Conveyor generates, upload them, go through the ID verification procedure that each CA has, and they will return to you the certificate files, which you then just drop in the right place and you're in action. So that simplifies things a lot. You don't have to muck about with OpenSSL and command line tools to generate keys and back them up in lots of different formats. You just have this one line of text, and that's all you need.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other thing is, yeah, I lost my train of thought. What I was thinking about. I still keep thinking about the Linux format one. Yeah, that is really a pain. I remember there's this talk on YouTube called like Linux Sucks, I think. Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, but he's just bringing out genuine like concerns about Linux, and of course the biggest one I think is like, what's the standard for packaging my app?
Yeah, well, it was ever thus. I was actually 20 years ago or so, I worked on an open source program on Linux, which it was a packaging tool for Linux specifically. And it was trying to solve this problem of every distribution using its own system. It was a sort of like, you could create one of those and it would figure out what it had to do on each distribution, almost like an installer. And it didn't really take off, but eventually some of the ideas kind of reappeared in the form of Docker with a more elegant implementation, but it was the same idea, right? You ship what you need with the app, and you have a format that isn't specific to any distribution and so on. So Linux has always been this way, and it probably always will be this way. I think after 20 years or so and it hasn't changed, it's not going to.
So people say that's the benefit, right? You don't want, this lock-in, right?
Yeah, it's it allows them to try out different things and experiment, and some of the tech is quite nice as a consequence. But it is a bit of a pain for developers who just want to ship their software for sure. This is why like I said, we do Debian stuff, and it has some features that integrate quite well. So, for example, if you are using native libraries that come with the OS, then Conveyor detects that, and it looks at what package dependencies should be, and it generates all the package dependencies for you. So the user can install your package, and then it will pull in all of the dependencies, and the operating system will keep those up to date, and so on. And that's all, again, that's done automatically. You can control it if you want, but by default, it works out the right answers for you. but yeah, the long tail of all the different formats is kind of expensive to support. So unless there's unless customers turn up and start saying we want this, then that's going to remain a sort of a we add support for extra formats when we have time.
Yeah. I understand what you mean. Like, I've been playing with my Steam Deck recently, and they're big supporters of flat packs, and that's probably the first time I've heard of a flat pack. I'm usually an Ubuntu kind of guy, so super
Yeah,
apt against all Debian packages. So this flat pack thing, what is that? And I
yeah,
think I seen RPMs before, and then I forgot what else I used. But
yeah. Ubuntu also has this Flatpak-like thing called Snap.
yeah, Snap I've heard of recently. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's locked to Canonical's App Store, which is one thing. I mean, I think one of the rather than adding more support for Linux formats, probably the next thing we're looking at is actually the Microsoft and Apple app stores. So automating the process of publishing through those. Currently, Conveyor, you just need a web server. It helps you distribute apps outside the stores, but there's no deep reason it must be so, and we can easily upload things to like the Microsoft Store and the Apple Store if you want.
and I just remember my question. My question before I was going to ask was about the browser detection. Like, how good is that? Because like, if I remember correctly, everybody still says that they're Netscape in the browser.
Well, so it works well in Chrome. Yes, so Chrome.
Because browsers basically tell you whatever they want to tell you. Like, you have no control.
Yeah. Well, on Chrome it's fine. So you can ask the browser what operating system and CPU architecture are you, and then you get the right download button. Safari, for privacy reasons, always claims to be Intel, even if you're running an Apple Silicon.
Interesting.
And so at that point, we offer the page has 2 download buttons. You don't have to use this HTML page, of course. It's just a convenience. You can provide your own download buttons and download page if you want. But it does mean the user has to know what CPU they have. I think
nobody really knows.
In future, what we'll probably do is make apps fat for you by default and things like that.
I thought most of the time it's like universal, but I guess it depends on your build, right?
It depends. Yeah. So, for example, for Electron and JVM apps, right, like the runtimes, because they're very large, they get distributed as like CPU specific, and then you pick the right one. But well, the other thing we've looked at is actually doing a little installer for macOS. So a universal installer that figures out the right one and only downloads that, because the faster the download is, then the more users succeed and the more users will do it. You can also, if you control the download and extraction code, you can actually also use better compression algorithms than what macOS supports and things like that. So that's something we might do in future. But at the moment, what you get is the user is asked if they're on Safari.
Yeah, I've also heard that, and even to get like the auto updater working within, like if you want to write something that would get the auto updates, you have to write like a separate package and everything else, or a separate service or something. There's a lot of goofiness with it.
Well, we integrate Sparkle for you, right? So with one of the things that Conveyor does better than other tools is you don't need to alter any of your code to get online updates. It just works out of the box. And on macOS, what we do is we inject Sparkle into your app. And yes, Sparkle contains like multiple sub apps and things, and we put them in all the right places and make sure they get signed and so on. So you don't have to worry about that. You just, in fact, you don't even have to think about Sparkle at all. The only thing you have to say is what update mode you want, right? If you want like background updates, or if you want update on launch, where that's useful if you've got a protocol, like your app is a front end to some server, and you're updating the protocol quite often. Then you want your app to always be fresh, right? You don't want to have to support older versions of your clients.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, now that I finally understand, because I think what threw me off is one of the titles on here, which is about build your package. I was thinking that means build your app, but it actually means build your package.
Good feedback.
Basically.
Good feedback. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So that's why I was confused. And
yeah. So we think of it as a build system because it's doing a lot of tasks in parallel, and it has dependency tracking for the different tasks and so on. But yeah, it's not actually compiling your app. This is something that only really started to matter when we added Flutter support, because the other frameworks you don't compile anything. But this is that's good feedback. Thank you. We can definitely tweak the wording there. And as you were saying before we started recording, right, we need more video material and more show don't tell kind of tutorials. That's definitely on the list of things to do.
Yeah, because I don't even know what you would even call this kind of thing. I mean, I guess it is like a, I don't know, what would you call it? Build your,
Oh, yeah, packaging
yeah,
tool, I
packaging
guess,
tool.
something like that. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There's not much out there that's
Yeah,
like it, so it's a bit hard to explain
definitely.
exactly what it does in a
Because
few
usually that'd be
words.
part of your CI service, right? Build the package after you build the service. That's what I think, at least.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if you follow like the GitHub Action tutorial we have, what you end up with is CI, CI tasks that build on each OS, and then one that runs on Linux because Linux is the cheapest and fastest, basically, and then it runs Conveyor and it takes. Yes, so the Linux worker is the one responsible for generating all of the packages and signing them and so on, and that works well because Linux workers are very plentiful and cheap, and a Mac worker on GitHub Actions will cost 10x what a Linux worker does. So you really want to be using it for as less time as possible just to save that money. And with Conveyor, you can do that, right, and all of the work of notarizing and so on can be done on Linux.
Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm pretty clear on what it is, and makes much more sense now.
Hmm.
And I can imagine this would be something that a lot of IT teams would love to have, even for consultancies if they have consistent clients that want a desktop app. I mean, I think it's perfect.
I think it's also really useful for things like internal apps and dashboards and things, especially the MSIX. I mean, you mentioned at the start, actually, you were talking about how, Inno setup, is that really good to distribute to financial clients and banks and so on? And the answer is, well, no, not really, because the first thing a big IT department is going to do, because they need consistency, is they're going to unwrap your installer and turn it into an MSIX, right? And Microsoft have tools that will do this kind of semi-automatically, but of course it's a bit of a hack, right? By using MSIX natively as its own format, Conveyor makes it way, way easier to get desktop apps deployed inside organizations, because suddenly, that IT department can just point Windows at your the download site that it generated for you, that Conveyor generated for you, and push it out over their network. And because it's all declarative, Windows can even do tricks like it'll make it appear in your start menu without it actually being installed, and things like that. The moment you click it's pulled down automatically, and it means that they can control the update schedule if they need, and it integrates with Intune and Active Directory and other common Windows admin tools. So it eliminates enormous headaches for IT departments if you distribute your software in this way.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, 550 sounds like a lot, but and when you actually go through and you break it down, like, well, if you see the average, price of a developer in US times 8, it's actually a little bit cheaper than
Yep.
2 days is what you put down here.
Yeah, exactly. So we phrase and say, like, if you spend more than 2 days on trying to figure this stuff out yourself, you've already spent more money than you would have spent on just buying the
Well,
product.
yeah, in general, I mean, in total, the amount of time I spent trying to figure out Windows desktop stuff
I bet it's more than
and
2
Mac,
days.
it's been probably let's just be generous and say 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So the interesting thing about making developer tools is it's a very tough market, right? Because we, as developers, and I've been in that position, we tend to like zero rate our own time mentally, especially inside people. If you work inside a large company, we just think, okay, I've got a task, I'm getting my salary, so like I'm just going to just do it, and no matter how much time it takes, that's whatever it costs, right? So most of our customers are smaller companies, because in smaller companies, people are much more aware of this trade-off, and they're much more likely to say, if there's a tool that saves me time, then it's a no-brainer. And as you said, right, your case is completely typical. There's nothing unusual about that. Yeah, 2 weeks is, if anything, is pretty fast, I would say. So it's definitely worth it in terms of the cost of your time.
Well, I mean, luckily I spent. I mean, the thing with me is I'm just flat out curious.
Yeah.
So like it kind of was like a twofer at this point, and then like now I know how it all works, and I have these scripts ready to go. So the next time I need to make this kind of app, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Right. I got it all ready to go. I mean, I would definitely consider something like this if I had consistent clients that needed the desktop app. I think that's totally fine. I don't necessarily at the moment. This is our first round for this, guys. But if things go well, then maybe we'll look into this.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, still, I mean, the only thing that's stopping us right now is just everybody. So I'm the only one here with an Intel Mac. Everybody else has an M1.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other thing that's stopping us. Is like I'm the build guy for the time.
Right. Yep.
So that's the only thing that's causing us a problem is I can't farm that out. So that getting the CI going for that one would be my next thing.
Yeah. Well, you should be able to compile for Intel on an ARM Mac, I think.
Well, supposedly, but so they have Windows 11 on their machine, but
Oh,
they
I
were
see.
unable to run. I think some of the plugins for some reason weren't working properly.
Yeah, for ARM. You mean right running Windows?
Yeah,
Yes, yes,
if
yes.
I remember correctly, that was what the issue was. I think it was actually Sparkle that was actually causing the issue, if I
Yeah,
remember
yeah, yeah,
correctly.
yeah. Well, yeah. So this might allow you to solve that problem, right? And then you can finally upgrade to an M1 Mac too.
Yeah, well, I have an M1. Like I was thinking about using that sometimes, just because I don't have most of these issues. I mean, I think about 95 to 99% of the issues have been solved,
Yep.
but there's still like these random things that
Yeah.
happen.
Exactly. This is the kind of pain that the goal of our company is to just get rid of this pain, right? You shouldn't have to think about like what CPU am I using and am I the build guy and all that stuff, right? With other frameworks, it's mostly there because they don't have a native code component in the same way Flutter Desktop does. But that's a solvable problem. And if we were successful in getting and attracting customers, and we've got some already, but successful in growing and attracting more in the Flutter ecosystem, that's absolutely the kind of problem we could just sit down and solve. It's not. It's just a matter of programming in the end, right? It's not fundamental.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about this. Now I understand what it is, and yeah, I kind of
You can get rid of all your hacky scripts.
yeah. Now that I figured out all the hard things, it's like, well, thanks for telling me now.
Yeah,
It's
sorry
like
about that. We didn't
after
quite
you
get
messed up
past
a couple of times, you know that feeling when after it took you a long time to do it, and you messed up a few times, and then somebody walks by and says, "Why don't you just do it that way?" And you're like, "Yeah, well, thanks for telling me now. I figured it out
Yeah,
the
sorry
long way."
about that. Yeah, but at least you can get rid of all of your like scripts and things and
No, those
source
are
those out.
gold, right? I'm gonna sell these.
Okay, maybe we're going to be competitors then. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm gonna sell these now.
Mhm.
These are gold because I realized, really, like I said, finding out how to install this certificate. I'm so surprised because everybody's like, "Yeah, just install it and it goes in your thing." Nobody tells you which storage, and
No.
I was shocked. Even on Microsoft thing, they don't tell you.
The documentation is not always great. I agree.
Yeah,
It's
but
not
like,
ideal.
and I used a tool to generate the certificate because like running on the the PowerShell was not simple.
No.
And then I used the same tool to install it. And then you know how I found out which one it was? By hand. I went through
Yeah,
and
just
found
went through
all my
try all of them.
certificates and
Yeah.
just not uninstall everything, but uninstall all the ones that got installed from mine. So all the ones signed with my company. I just, for some reason, it put them in a bunch of different stores. I'm not too sure why, but I found the one store that was stopping it from being installed, and that was Trusted People.
Yep.
And that was it.
Well, right. So this is the kind of thing that is like not core to your business, right? Which is why it makes sense to outsource it when possible. But yeah, it's apologies we didn't get launched sooner. We've been, like I said, working our way through the different frameworks. But
Well,
at
this
least
is a recent thing, but in any case, like, again, I don't even know how to even find this kind of thing because like I just look to see what Flutter says.
Yes.
And they're like, "Oh yeah, you build MSIX. Okay,
Right.
cool."
So this
And then you
is one
can
of the
sign it, and it's like, "Okay, cool." But
this is
how?
definitely one of the things that I talked to one of the Flutter one of the people who's running Flutter about like could we be mentioned in the documentation because that's how people will find these tools. But they were not keen. They seem to think there's some sort of like slippery slope or something like that where everybody would
Yeah,
want to be mentioned in the docs. I don't know.
of
So
course.
it's quite hard to know how to get people to be aware of what we're doing. That's definitely challenge numero uno for us.
No, I understand. The one thing. I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know, but what I do notice about Flutter is that they try their best to not show favoritism.
Mm, mm.
You can take it how you want to take it,
Well, I get that.
but
I totally understand.
yeah,
I totally understand why they want to have that position. But yeah, it definitely means that yeah, if there's a solution out there that can save people time, you just won't necessarily even find out that it exists, right? Unless you're very deep into that community and following all this.
so let's. I think this is a good way to start to wind it down, right? Sorry to ask you, but do you have any competitors?
Well, I mean, on basically every framework has its own like freebie tools that try to do this. They're mostly just wrappers around the native tools. So they're going to give you a JSON file and then they'll invoke the native tools on each platform, and you have to run it on Windows and Mac and Linux. And then if anything goes wrong, what you see is the error message from the underlying tool. But they're open source and they're free, and because they don't really abstract very much, right? They tend to have plugins for every format you can imagine and so on. So those are our primary competitors. We've taken a very different approach. We say we're more restrained in how many formats we generate and things, but it works on any platform, and there's a lot of usability work that's gone into the product. So it's all about simplicity, really. The focus is more on being a lot simpler than those tools, and taking care of a lot of the details for you. And then the flip side is, if you want some obscure format on Linux or whatever, then we don't do that currently. But those are our primary competitors. It's the tutorials and the free tools and so on, the platform tools.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to say? Because we're kind of a little bit over time.
No. I think thanks very much for inviting me to chat with you. It's great. We've had a nice welcome actually from the Flutter community so far. People have tried it out and said, this is exactly what we were looking for. This is great. Thank you so much. And we've been made to feel very welcome. And now our challenge is to get out there and help ensure everyone knows about us. So thank you very much. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to come on.
Yeah, great. Thank you for coming on and telling us about us and making it clear to me, because I read it not quite clear about what it was. So I'm happy.
Marketing always tough for developer tools companies, so we'll get that improved.
Cool. Thank you again for coming on, and any new updates, maybe feel free to come back on and let us know how it's going.
Definitely will do. Thanks very much.